back to the paper, the results of the study were pretty eye-opening. Can you talk about like the published findings of the experiment?
Getting back to the traditional scientific literature approach, I documented in that paper it takes months because there is this peer review process. But perhaps the most disappointing is the distribution. With social media, because the information is displayed almost immediately, the outreach is not a few thousand, it's hundreds of thousands or even millions. And so now we can make an impact through social media because of the much wider distribution. So I was able to find an influencer through a website who has her own channel and interviewed her along with some other people to see how well she can communicate and how well she can express ideas. And found that she was very credible, very professional, and have used her for all of my TikToks over the past 18 months. her her family has a medical background, and so it was not just a an influencer, but had some credibility. It's been a nice collaboration because I know my science, I know my medicine, but I don't know social media, and she's a professional in that area. I have a dedicated following of 50,000 to this date, about 100,000 likes, and over 6 million views. And that's what I was getting at. I was hoping to get people to look at it and to follow my channel.
This is Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast for patients.
Thank you for tuning in to Genetics for Healthcare, a podcast dedicated to helping patients and their caregivers advocate for a precision medicine approach to treatment, disease screening, and prevention. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and soon to be TikTok. Please hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to get alerts and updates on new episodes like this one. Today, I've got Dr. Alan Wu, who is the Chief of Clinical Chemistry and Toxicology at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. Thank you, Dr. Wu, for being a guest on Genetics for Healthcare.
Well, thank you, Mr. Madison, for having me on your program.
Please call me Rome because Mr. Madison is still my dad. So, your background, you've been trained by some of the early thought leaders and pioneers in chemistry and science of laboratory medicine. Tell us a little bit about your background and what attracted you to the academic discipline of laboratory medicine.
Well, it actually started as an undergraduate. I was a chemistry and biology major and was looking to go to medical school and was doing chemistry senior thesis research. And my mentor at the time told me that if you wanted to see patients, you had to go to medical school, the end of story. But if you want to use science to solve medical problems, that there's an alternative route. And so he directed me to a program at the University of Illinois where I got a doctoral degree in analytical chemistry and began my career in really doing clinical laboratory science. And from there, I went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship in clinical chemistry at Hartford Hospital, who had a program that had been invoked for 20 plus years and had matriculated clinical chemists that were scattered throughout the nation.
So I heard you speak at the Precision Medicine World Conference, and of all the content that was there, I mean, Precision Medicine World Conference is very much a forward think tank, early adopters, key opinion leaders of what's to come in the area of precision medicine. And of 4 days of content, I gotta say, Dr. Wu, that your keynote was one of the most entertaining and engaging. We'll get to that in a minute, but let me ask you this. Um, I've worked in the industry, precision medicine industry, for over 20 years, and I will tell you that I have over 20,000 hours in the operating room watching tumors be resected from, patients as old as 90 years old and babies as young as 9 months old. And I have followed the resection of that tissue from the operating room to surge path where they're doing frozen sections to the histology rooms to those folks in the laboratory that have to handle that tissue, that preserve that tissue, that make blocks out of that tissue. And when medical questions need answers or a clinical diagnosis is needed when people have, health issues, how often is the laboratory involved in this process? May sound like a dumb question, but how often is the laboratory involved in this process?
Well, we are clearly the medicine behind the scenes. It has been estimated that 70% of all medical decisions, whether it be diagnostic or therapeutic or disease recurrence, are based on the result of one or more clinical laboratory tests. So, yes, we are front and center in just about anything. Maybe some areas like plastic surgery, maybe we're not so much involved.
Yeah. There's a lot of people who listen to this podcast and others that are familiar with, oncology, radiology, surgeons, infectious disease doctors, other specialties such as urologist or cardiologist, and they may not be aware of the fact that all of those doctors ordering tests, they go to a laboratory. And I've heard you say that people just don't understand what happens in a laboratory because, as you mentioned, the 70% of those answers that these treating physicians need to make a decision on what to do for those patients come from the laboratory. And I've got a tremendous respect for laboratorians and the work that goes on there. But in the medical laboratory, I don't think people are as familiar with the role of pathology and what happens in the laboratory that creates the opportunity for successful treatment. But, you know, why do you think that is that they're just not aware?
Well, part of it is because of how the laboratory is portrayed in television shows and popular media, and there is no single advocate for the lab. So you watch a medical show, and a doctor sees a patient and sends a sample off to the lab or conducts a biopsy. And what is then happens? The doctor himself goes to the lab, looks at the slide, makes the diagnosis, and has an aha moment. Okay, that doesn't happen. There are a team of professionals who are trained to do just that and nothing else. Pathologists, laboratory technologists. And then when it comes to blood tests, so everybody knows that we need to do blood testing for health and for disease. And we'll go see our doctor and we get blood taken and it gets sent to a lab. It comes back a day later, magically, as if nobody had any involvement. It's put into a tube, push a button onto a machine, and voila, results come out. That's not how laboratories are done, or laboratory testing is done. We have a team of dedicated experts who run that sample, determine if the sample quality is good, if the result makes sense, make interpretations. All of these things are behind the scenes that nobody sees.
Yeah, and you've mentioned that medical centers, hospitals, the lab is very much the foundation of the services that they provide. But you've mentioned that these hospitals, medical centers devote about 5% of the operational budget to the lab. Is that did I read that right? 5%, is that right?
Yeah, it's crazy that the impact that we have being so high and the investment into the laboratory is discordant to the value that the laboratory provides.
So your keynote at the Precision Medicine World Conference was centered around a study that you did that I thought was super innovative. You were the lead author on a study published in the Journal of Applied Laboratory Medicine titled "The Use of Social Media to Promote Lab Medicine to Students, Patients, and the General Public." You guys can find that on PubMed. We'll have the link to that on the episode description page. But it was published in January of this year. Why did you feel this was an important topic to research in this way?
Well, I have embarked on a mission to educate um, the lay public on what the laboratory does. And that is a very difficult task because it's not like you can just write a paper in the New England Journal and everybody will see it. The lay public doesn't read medical literature. It takes a long time to get a good article published, and they don't generally publish stories about people. And so it is, there's no traditional platform for dissemination of medical and or laboratory information to the general public up until now. And so I would say the revolution of social media, and there are now a dozen different websites, you've listed some of them, is the way that information can be disseminated. Now, it doesn't come without a cost. The cost is that you don't always know if the information is true or not, that um, the data and the science is not vetted in the same way as a peer review article. So that is the downside of social media. But the upside is that you have instant distribution. It reaches thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of viewers very quickly. And like any media report, the content is subject to validation, that you can't just necessarily accept what is being said. You have to understand and then determine if the information is viable. But at least you have initiated a conversation.
And that's really the our vision and ambition with Genetics for Healthcare, this podcast, Dr. Wu. There's been so many explosive innovations in the space with liquid biopsy, gene editing, um, NGS testing for cancer, and now other diseases to optimize treatment for patients. And I mean, if we just take like lung cancer, for instance, EGFR is a driver mutation in lung cancer. I think the first targeted therapy was 2004. And still today, 100% of lung cancer patients don't get EGFR testing. And there is, on the NCCN, guidelines, at least 10 biomarkers that you should test, patients with. The long and the short is it's patient access. Patients are not getting the test, even though where there's a clear indication for a disease or a decision to be made, many times patients aren't even being offered or made aware of these tests. So I believe that social media obviously is where everybody is. Love it or hate it. There's some virtues to it, and that's to be able to deliver this type of information so just people are aware and hopefully encourage them to do their own research into these things.
Yeah, that is part of my platform. I believe that our population should be more involved in the medical decisions that are being made on themselves and on their loved ones. Now, that
Mm.
wasn't the case in my generation. My generation, people didn't have the internet when I was your age, and we didn't accept um, anything but what a doctor says is best for you. I don't think that that's good enough anymore. I think that patients should go to their provider, get laboratory data through portals, investigate the results of the tests that have been ordered, and have a dialogue between yourself and your provider as to why a particular course of treatment or a set of laboratory tests was selected. And then you become a participant in your own care. And why wouldn't you want to do that? there are plenty of credible medical websites that give you this kind of information, such as WebMD or
Mhm.
the Mayo Medical, or there's a site called uh, tests, laboratory tests. And then you can be a more compliant patient because you have a reason for doing the things that your doctor says. Or if it turns out that the doctor isn't quite up to speed with everything, have that conversation and challenge that doctor. We shouldn't be so passive.
You hit the nail on the head. I couldn't have said it better. And this is really the message that we want to deliver to patients and their caregivers, their family and their friends, to empower them not only with the information but also the confidence. So, back to the paper, the results of the study were pretty eye-opening. Can you talk about like the published findings of the experiment?
Well, getting back to the traditional scientific literature approach, I documented in that paper it takes months because there is this peer review process. But perhaps the most disappointing is the distribution. The distribution in readerships, as indicated by citation factors or downloads or things like that, is in the thousands. With social media, because the information is displayed almost immediately, the outreach is not a few thousand, it's hundreds of thousands or even millions. And so now we can make an impact through social media because of the much wider distribution. But it can't just be about science and medicine because no one will tune into that. The social media advocates always say, keep it short, keep it interesting, and storytelling is the way to go.
So, you started a TikTok channel. And it's not just you on delivering scientific information. How did you think about, creating that TikTok channel to maximize the engagement and get, people to actually follow it?
Well, it helps that my daughter works for TikTok and she helped me create the channel and t- educated me as to the steps involved. And it was not difficult in the long run. Obviously, the most difficult part is content, putting
Mhm.
together compelling content that is both a mixture of entertainment and education. That we need to send a message, but the message can't be the reason why somebody comes onto the channel. It has to be, well, I see somebody got into trouble or had some medical problems. We want to learn about that person's journey. And then we want to find out what is the outcome of that person.
And you also had an influencer. So, I mean, again, like everybody doom scrolls, right? They're just scrolling. I'm guilty of it. We just scroll, 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 and we see a face, we hear a voice, we stop. Right. So what's that been like? How did who's the influencer that you got on, and how did you kind of give direction to the stories and content that you wanted to deliver?
So I was able to find an influencer through a website who has her own channel and interviewed her along with some other people to see how well she can communicate and how well she can express ideas. And found that she was very credible, very professional, and have used her for all of my TikToks over the past 18 months. her her family has a medical background, and so it was not just a an influencer, but had some credibility. And between the two of us, we come up with the storylines. We become the images that are needed. Sometimes background music. It's been a nice collaboration because I know my science, I know my medicine, but I don't know social media. And she's a professional in that area
Yeah.
and
What's,
co-author of this paper that you read.
oh, okay. So what's the name of your TikTok channel and where everyone can follow you and look at your content?
It's hashtag lab tales, Tales. And the logo is um, some um, pills.
Lab tales. So, what was the traction and engagement that you saw over the course of the study, and how has that grown since then?
I have a dedicated following of 50,000 to this date, about 100,000 likes, and over 6 million views. That's a little bit misleading because sometimes people just click and then they come off, but a large number of clicks. And that's what I was getting at. I was hoping to get people to look at it and to follow my channel.
So, something that you said in your keynote, I thought was really spot on. Is, with all the innovation, that is happening, and even uncertainty, innovation doesn't mean much if patients can't access it, right? And the paper mentions that this lack of understanding that the public may have on how labs operate has led to unfavorable legislation that could threaten the ability of labs to be innovative. What are you referring to?
Well, there are ongoing legislation called the LDT. LDT stands for Laboratory Developed Tests, which means that if a medical center like mine develops a test and validates it on their patient population, up until now, we were able to release those results and stand by them. Congress passed the LDT legislation saying that no, you have to get that test approved by the Food and Drug Administration, just like any other test or just like any drug or any device. And that would be fine if the FDA had a facile manner for doing this approval, but it takes millions and months, if not years, to get any laboratory test approved. And therefore, the tests that we're doing that we have developed and we have validated, in theory, cannot be used moving forward. And every medical center in the country has dozens, if not hundreds, of laboratory developed tests. In the area where you, in particular, have had this podcast, genetics, in personalized medicine, the majority of those tests are LDTs. And
Hmm.
if this law goes through, it will be shut down. I don't think that's what we need or want as a medical community.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's important that patients, understand that, because even though I believe we're not making as much use of the tests that are already available, with this type of, I guess, disruption potentially, it could stunt innovation. Because what's the incentive for a manufacturer or a laboratory to develop a test if they know now they have to spend millions of dollars in, you know, a year, 2 years plus to validate that test? By the time you get approval for that test, there's probably another technology that has outdated that test, and how could you monetize it? So that could be a challenge. Pharmacogenomics is is a very valuable tool that I believe is one of those tests that we really need to make better use of. Talk about the clinical utility of pharmacogenomics.
Well, pharmacogenomics is using our germline variances to determine the efficacy and potential for toxicity of our therapeutic drugs. It's a little bit different from the EGFR example that you gave for lung cancer, which is really more looking at somatic mutations. There are enzymes in our liver that break down drugs and make them be excreted. If we have a variant such that we cannot break down that drug according to what is the expectation, then that drug stays around a little bit longer than you want and can cause a toxicity. So many of the drugs that we use in routine practice have pharmacogenomic variances. We're talking things like warfarin, like clopidogrel, codeine, tamoxifen, and the best use of these drugs will be to have a pharmacogenomic test to determine if you are wild type or you have a poor metabolism or ultra rapid metabolism genotype that will affect both the efficacy and potential for toxicity.
That's big because some of the reported numbers say that upwards of 45 million patients in the US are on 5 drugs or more for various, concomitant illnesses. And with these pharmacogenomic tests being LDTs, if they are now, regulated and you can't get availability of those tests, like talk about the potential economic impact to the healthcare system with just not having these things available.
Well, some of these tests are FDA approved, and so for those, it's not so much of a that's not so much the problem. It's really the caregivers are not necessarily educated as to the importance of pharmacogenomic tests, and therefore not ordering them. So it comes right back to who is the laboratory, what does the laboratory provide, and how can we best use our services. And in the area of pharmacogenomics, this is a underutilized service, not so much because of the lack of tests, but because of a lack of utilization of that test. And there is a more subtle underlying theme here. The pharma industry are moving away from tests that have been used for decades in
Mm.
favor of next generation tests that might do the same thing but don't have a pharmacogenomic interaction. I'm talking, for example, warfarin. Warfarin has been widely used as an anticoagulant for 50 years, and it's slowly being replaced by the direct acting oral anticoagulants, or DOACs. DOACs don't really have a laboratory component for testing and is not influenced for pharmacogenomics. So that's probably good news. The bad news is that they're still on patent, and pharma is making a lot more money on these drugs than they are for warfarin, which still is used and can be used more inexpensively. So you talk about healthcare costs. The implementation of on patent drugs contributes to that.
So I also understand that you have an interest in like cardiac biomarkers for acute cardiac disease and other innovative ways that laboratories are creating, different biomarker tests to inform therapy. Talk about that and what are the potential impacts to benefit our healthcare?
Yeah, so cardiac markers have always been in the forefront of our cardiovascular disease health. That's one of the better things that we've done. The American Heart Association has been extremely active in promoting cardiac health by the cholesterol testing and by doing wellness and understanding risk factors. In the area of acute cardiac disease, there's also been innovation such that we can use cardiac troponin today to rule out heart attacks much sooner than we could have even just 5 years ago. Not everybody has adopted the latest generation of troponin, but this is something that is ongoing.
I mentioned at the top of our conversation that you were one of the more creative scientists in terms of, when I say creative, in terms of arts that I've met or come across. So you've written several books about around like laboratories or things that involve laboratory science that is pretty compelling. Like what was your inspiration for even writing these books? How many books have you written? Tell us about that.
Well, thank you for your comment about my creativity. This has definitely been a diversion and outlet from my normal day to day operation. I started this uh, publication 10 years ago with Amazon. we can now self-publish a lot easier than we can with a traditional publishing house. And at that time, I had a series of medical case reports that were published in the primary literature that talked about a laboratory test in conjunction with this disease. And a peer-reviewed case report has to be really scientifically vetted and also um, privacy compliant. From that, I decided to make these stories a little bit more interesting by fictionalizing the social history in order to be HIPAA compliant or privacy compliant, but while keeping the medical information and the laboratory tests accurate. And just like my social media posts, the objective was to talk about lab medicine, talk about the importance of laboratory tests without necessarily being a journal article. And so, unlike the social media posts, which are just 2 to 3 minutes, these are 20 pages. They'll take 20 minutes to read, and they're much more detailed. It is actually the starting point for my social media posts.
So you pull your content from the case studies, and you're making social media content to get the everyday person that's out there engaged.
Exactly.
Wow. So, how many books have you written to date?
I have 7. I have
Jeez.
one on each book has about 20 stories, one on chemistry tests, one on microbiology or infectious disease, another one on toxicology. You know, the nation is immersed in toxicological issues with the opioid pandemic and the different medical legal cases that we see on TV. And so that book does extremely well because it's a behind the scenes of what toxicology labs do to answer cause of death. And so that's one of my books. I don't know if you are a big sports fan. I am. I have a book on performance enhancing drugs and how that affects our world today. And there are many issues that we hear about, steroids or doping or erythropoietin that over the years have been topical, and I write about that.
Yeah. Well, you didn't stop at writing books. You mentioned that TV trivializes, laboratories. Dr. House that walks in and, solves this mysterious mystery because he looks at a microscope for a few seconds. Um, and there's a lot of, CIS, all these different franchises, medical shows that my wife binge watches on Hulu. But all of these shows surrounding medicine, again, the foundation of the answers that they get to make the decisions on the TV shows comes from a lab. And you've got a solution for that. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a proposal for a television show, or you've written a television show?
Well, I have engaged a professional screenwriter and have been working with him for the past 2 years to come up with a pilot script for a new TV program tentatively entitled Labs. And it's going to feature the exploits of clinical laboratory directors like myself and my staff as we interact with physicians and patients to solve medical mysteries, to make medical diagnoses, to influence the treatment of patients, just like in my TikToks, just like in my stories. But the key to a television show is that I want to make it dramatic and popular, not a science show. This is not going to be a Forensic Files or a Nova. This is meant to be more like Crime Scene Investigation or NCIS, which all have stories that focus around real people and how the crime lab is able to solve the issues at hand. And so, just like medical shows today, the police shows Back in the day before CSI, were all about cops and lawyers and detectives. Now it's about the science and solving those crimes. That's the same kind of approach I want to take with labs. I want science to take front and center stage and the information being used by doctors in solving these cases.
That's super interesting. So tell us, did you write yourself a part in the show?
Well, I am the chemistry lab director, but it's not about me. It's about my team and the people that have work in my lab to solve these. Now, so what I'm not good at, because I'm not professionally trained, is character development and
Hmm.
developing arcs and having a reason for why an audience member might want to tune in from week to week, or these days from hour to hour if we're binging it. This is where my screenwriter comes into play. His name is Will, and he is putting together compelling character content that is sometimes quirky, sometimes serious. There are going to be romantic relationships. There's going to be evolution. There's going to be triumphs. There's going to be failures. And we even have recurrent antagonists. So there's going to be conflicts above and beyond the medical and science storylines. And that's what I hope will keep people tuned in.
I just think it's amazing. I thought it was fantastic how you spoke about it at Precision Medicine World Conference. I wish you nothing but success. Something tells me that, I mean, the idea you're certainly onto something. Something tells me you're likely to be highly successful with Labs, the TV show, as well as the TikTok channel. If you guys are on TikTok, please follow Lab Tales. Dr. Wu, give them your website if somebody wants to go check out your books or contact you for speaking, other media opportunities. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, my books can be found on my website, alanhbwu.com, and my email address is alan.wu@ucsf.edu. So, Rome, you know that in science and in medicine, it's really all about content and it's about putting together good science and good proposals, and things can happen. That doesn't happen in Hollywood. Hollywood is very much about who do you know and what
Mm.
contacts you have. And I have zero. I have my own professional content and credibility. I have zero when it comes to Hollywood. I don't have an IMDb page. I guess what I'm trying to say to your audience, if you feel that this podcast has stimulated you to think and you have some connections with the industry and feel that these ideas are might have legs, feel free to contact me. I would love to have a conversation or contact Rome, and together we can make this happen.
Absolutely. And we'll have those links for you to get in touch with Dr. Wu. Follow Lab Tales on TikTok and all the helpful information that he's delivered here. Dr. Wu, I can't thank you enough. And I just wish you nothing but the best. We'll stay connected because I believe that your vision deserves a platform. My goodness, how many different platforms do we have for content out there? Give me a break. This is something that needs to be seen. Thank you for being a guest on Genetics for Healthcare, podcast for patients.
Thank you for having me.